English 201, week 14, part 9. I'm going to read another funny poem. This is a little bit longer. It's got by a guy named James Tate, and it's in his book of collected poetry, of selected poems, which is, I'll say why that's important in a second. There's a couple of vocabulary words you might need. Well, first of all, there's Napoleon, who was I don't know if you know Napoleon, but he was like a military conqueror. In sort of like 18th century France. I'm pretty sure that's right. So he was like a military conqueror in like 18th century France. And they mentioned him wearing a tricorn hat. A tricorn hat is the kind of hat you associate with like George Washington or pirates. It's essentially like almost like a triangular. Like there's a piece here and then a piece here and a piece here. It's like Johnny Depp wears in Pirates of the Caribbean. So it's like an old fashioned hat from a couple of hundred years ago that sort of looks like a pirate hat, although non-pirates also wore it. But you would probably know it best as a pirate hat. That's what a tricorn hat is. They mentioned a bathing cap. I assume you know what a bathing cap is, right? But it's just like a rubber thing that you wear so you don't get your hair wet. So if you're gonna swim or something, you would put like a rubber cap on that keeps your hair from getting water in it. Um, Eccentricity is a word that just means strange, and that's it. I think that's all you need for this poem, and I'm gonna read it right now. It's one of my favorite poems, but like again, it's not a complicated puzzle box. Okay, let's take a look at it. Here's the poem. James Tate's list of famous hats. Napoleon's hat is an obvious choice, I guess, to list as a famous hat, but that's not the hat I have in mind. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention. So Napoleon also wore one of those sort of tricorn hats, like a pirate hat. James Tate's list of famous hats. Napoleon's hat is an obvious choice, I guess, to list as a famous hat, but that's not the hat I have in mind. That was his hat for show. I am thinking of his private bathing cap, which, in all honesty, wasn't much different from the one any jerk might buy at a corner drugstore now, except for two minor eccentricities. The first one isn't even funny. Simply, it was a white rubber bathing cap, but too small. Napoleon led such a hectic life ever since his childhood, well, even farther back than that he never had a chance to buy a new bathing cap. And still, as a grown up, well, he didn't really grow that much, but his head did. He was a pinhead at birth, and he used, until his death really, the same little tiny bathing cap that he was born in, and this meant that later it was very painful to him and gave him many headaches, as if he needed more. So he had to Vaseline his skull like crazy to even get the thing on. The second eccentricity was that it was a tricorn bathing cap. Scholars like to make a lot out of this, and it would be easy to do. My theory is simple-minded to be sure, that beneath his public head, there was another head, and it was a pyramid or something. That's it. That's the whole poem. If it doesn't make sense to you, it's kind of not supposed to. It's just silly. It's just a silly poem. For starters, it's just full of ironies, and the ironies make it funny, and it's ridiculous. So for starters, it's in a book of poetry. This doesn't look like a poem. This looks like a paragraph. So that's ironic. Also, it's called List of Famous Hats. This is not a list. um, um, it's also got a lot of weird stuff in here, like why, like he's supposed to be a famous hat, and he talks about a private bathing cap. Private means that nobody would see it but Napoleon. Um, he also talks about how Napoleon was born in it, like the same little tiny bathing cap he was born in. People are not born with hats on. Um, and also this idea that because he used the same hat he was born in, that it was painful to him because he grew, but this was the hat he had as a baby. Like, what? Like, that's nonsense. Then he announces at the end of the poem, it was a tricorn bathing hat, meaning it's a kind of bathing cap is supposed to be like a rubber thing you pull. It's like it's the same shape as your head. It's supposed to be like it's a cap. Just a tricorn bathing cap. What the hell would that even look like? It's a pirate hat that also is rubber and protects your hair. Like, it's just silly. It's just a silly poem, and there's nothing serious about it. Um, it it just makes me happy. It just makes me smile because it's an extremely silly poem. The ironies make me smile. It's ironic to me that it's in a book of poetry, but it doesn't look like a poetry. It doesn't look like a poem. It's ironic and funny to me that it's called a list of famous hats, but it's not a list. It's funny to me that it's about a historical figure and sort of sounds like a report about a historical figure, even though the details are nonsense. Like his private bathing cap was a tricorn bathing. Like, that's not true. He's just making silly stuff up. And like, that's enough. And the only thing that I might want to say in terms of metaphor is the last sentence. says scholars like to make a lot out of this, meaning the fact he says the second eccentricity, the second strange thing about Napoleon's hat, and he's not talking about his public hat, but his private bathing cap. The second eccentricity was that it was a tricorn bathing cap. Scholars like to make a lot out of this, and it would be easy to do. My theory is simple minded to be sure, that beneath his public head there was another head, and it was a pyramid or something. I think it's funny that one of the last things he says in this ridiculous poem is scholars like to make a lot out of this, meaning professors would have a lot of commentary on this. Um, and I think it's like he's making fun of me and people like me who say way too much about poetry and talk about it as an overcomplicated puzzle box. And so what he's done is he's written a poem that's I find very entertaining, and I think it's very funny and very silly, but also like there's not a lot I, as a scholar, can make out of it. Like, I'm not going to be able to teach a whole lesson on that poem. I'm not going to, like, give it to students and be like, let's have a class discussion about James Tate's list of famous hats. Like, it's not a, you know what I mean? Like, it's not that complicated. So I feel like he's making fun of people who come up with overly complicated theories about poetry, because he's making fun of people that would come up with overcomplicated theories about Napoleon's bathing cap. Um, I think it's worth pointing out, and nobody ever says this, it's okay for literature to just be fun. And I don't want to leave you all this semester with the impression that all literature everywhere has to be overcomplicated and like a puzzle and like a trick. Like Prospero's a great example of that because it looks like Prospero is a really nice person. And then I kind of analyzed him from another angle and I was like, haha, it's more complicated than you think. Prospero may actually be quite devious and evil like Iago. But like it's that because it makes for a good class discussion. It makes for a good debate. James Tate's list of famous hats does not make for a good class discussion, and it's not good for class discussion, it's not good for lecture, but it's fun. And like, teachers leave students with the impression that all literature is a bunch of overcomplicated hard work. Then they're like, why don't people read more nowadays? It's because you made it seem like too much work. You know what I mean? Like teachers give students if teachers give students the impression that all literature is like an overly complicated slog, then of course students are never going to want to read a poem again. So like it's worth pointing out that like this shit can just be something fun you do with your time, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. It can just be something you enjoy. Which I know seems crazy, but the reason why it seems crazy to enjoy a poem is because your whole life everybody gave you poems for class discussion. And like there are poems that aren't good for class discussion that might just be good for life. So it's just something to think about. It's something I wanted to end class with, because I gave you a lot of overcomplicated literature. In fact, I think actually this is kind of the perfect ending for the class because on the first day of class, I gave you The Phoenix and the Turtle. The Phoenix and the Turtle is one of the most complicated puzzle poems I have ever read in a lifetime of reading poetry. Like, that poem is ridiculously complicated. I never should have given that to you. It's got like it is like a code. There's all this shit you have to know about Renaissance theories of birds and also you need to know what a phoenix is because the poem doesn't tell you phoenixes come back to life, and so the only way to like solve the puzzle of the poem is to like know more about phoenixes than anybody in the poem mentions. So you'd have to get on Wikipedia and find out what a phoenix is. Like, I started the semester off with an overly complicated poem, and so I thought it might be fun to end the semester with just a stupid poem. Just something stupid and silly and fun. Okay, and I will see you in one more video, the last video of the semester. Yeah, you look how far if you watched all of these, like, holy shit. Okay, that's it. I'll see you in the next and final video.